Let's dive right in, shall we? This deep dive, it takes us straight into the heart of the Jewish high holidays.
Specifically Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Oh, right. Thanks for, clarifying.
Yeah,
Always got to keep us on track. But yeah, all based on that fascinating material you sent over.
I was curious to hear your thoughts.
Honestly, I'm hooked. Digging into these sources, the articles, sermons, even some poetry, I was blown away. There's this really intriguing push and pull.
How so?
We're talking about judgment, repentance, sin, like some pretty heavy themes. But at the same time, there's this thread of joy, celebration, even optimism woven throughout. So how do those two coexist? It's a head scratcher for sure.
It's a paradox that's captivated thinkers for centuries, this really fascinating tension at the very core of the high holidays.
And you know me, I love a good paradox. So before we get too deep into the weeds here, let's just quickly set the stage for our listener. We're essentially talking about the Jewish New Year, right?
That's right.
But it's not exactly the party hat and noisemakers kind of celebration, is it?
Not quite. It's much more about deep spiritual accounting, a time for profound reflection on the past year and seeking a clean slate for the year to come.
Yeah, our sources mention that imagery is pretty powerful too. You've got the shofar echoing in the synagogues, people reciting prayers of penitence, really bearing their souls. It's heavy stuff.
Absolutely. These are the days of awe, a period of intense introspection for the Jewish people.
And I think one rabbi in our readings summed it up perfectly, saying that every faithful Jew feels a tremor of, what was it, trepidation? Something like that.
Very apt word, for sure.
Okay, so we've got trepidation check. But this is where things take a turn for the paradoxical, wouldn't you say? Because in one of the articles, it mentions that Jews don't traditionally recite the Hallel, those joyful, praise-filled prayers during these holidays. And I get that, right? It'd be a bit odd belting out happy tunes when, according to tradition, your fate's hanging in the balance?
It's true. The Talmud even has this back and forth between a group of angels and God about it. It's almost humorous, really.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, the angels are essentially like, hey, shouldn't there be a bit more singing going on down there? It's a holiday after all. And God's response is essentially, let's not get ahead of ourselves here.
Huh. And yet, almost in the same breath, we've got Nehemiah, this key figure, practically urging people to celebrate. Feasting, good food, drinks, the whole shebang. He even says, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. I mean, come on. Which is it? Are we talking fear and trembling, or are we talking about a big celebratory feast?
That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. And to really understand it, we need to explore how this paradox has been interpreted throughout Jewish thought.
Okay, so how do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory emotions? Help me out here.
Well, it's not so much about choosing one or the other. It's not like, okay, today we're doing fear, tomorrow we'll sprinkle in some joy. It's more about understanding how these emotions can coexist, even complement each other.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So tell me, how do our sources frame this?
Well, they offer a few really compelling perspectives. The first one has to do with distinguishing between individual fate and what we might call collective fate.
Individual versus collective. Okay, unpack that a bit for me. What's the distinction?
So while individuals might be grappling with hardship, uncertainty in their own lives, that trepidation we were talking about, there's also this really deep-seated belief in the continued survival and ultimate triumph of the Jewish people as a whole.
So even when facing personal challenges, there's this grounding in something larger, something that endures.
Exactly. It speaks to the power of shared history, of collective faith, of knowing that you're part of something that's bigger than just your own individual experience.
Okay, I see that. It's like, even if my own little world feels chaotic, zooming out and tapping into that larger narrative can bring a sense of comfort, maybe even joy.
Right. But there's another layer to this, and it gets to the heart of how we understand divine judgment. Because you mentioned it earlier, this idea of our fate hanging in the balance.
Yeah, it's definitely a concept that makes you stop and think, Like, if there's this all-powerful being who's judging my every move, I'm not sure joy would be the first thing that comes to mind. Honestly, maybe a little dread.
And yet, our sources suggest that even when God's decrees seem harsh or difficult to grasp, they ultimately serve a greater purpose. Think of it like this: a loving parent who disciplines their child. It might be tough in the moment, but it comes from a place of love, right?
Right. It's not about punishment for its own sake. It's about guiding the child, helping them to grow.
Precisely. It's not about being afraid of judgment itself, but rather trusting that even when things are difficult, there's a higher purpose at play.
And that trust, that understanding of being part of something larger, I can see how that could be a source of joy, even amidst the uncertainty. But there's something we haven't touched on yet that feels really important to me, especially in the context of this whole fear versus joy thing. And that's the simple fact that as humans, we're capable of feeling so many things at once.
Right. It's not like our emotional lives come with these neat little compartments, fear over here, joy over there. We're messy. We experience it all often at the same time.
Tell me about it. Just the other day, I was over the moon about booking this amazing gig, but also low-key freaking out about whether I could actually pull it off by the deadline. Like heart palpitations, happy dance, all happening simultaneously.
And that's the beauty of being human, isn't it? That capacity to hold those seemingly contradictory emotions all at once. Which, funny enough, brings us back to one of the sources you sent, the one with that incredible analogy about the mother and her newborn.
Oh yeah, I remember that really struck me. Something about how that captures the essence of the high holidays.
Exactly. So picture this, a mother cradling her newborn child for the first time. Overwhelmed with joy, right? Love, awe. This tiny human she's brought into the world. But then at the same time, there's this undercurrent of anxiety, this fear for the child's well-being.
Because she knows, even if just subconsciously, that life is going to throw some curveballs.
Exactly. It's that bittersweet joy, this awareness that with great love comes a kind of vulnerability, a fear of potential pain or suffering. And it actually brings us to a broader point that I noticed woven throughout our sources. Just as the era of redemption, a really central concept in Jewish thought, is described as both challenging and dejoyous, so too are our own personal journeys.
Okay, now we're talking parallels. I love it. But just to back up for a sec, for those who might not be familiar, what exactly does era of redemption refer to?
Right. It's basically the beliefs in this future time, a time when suffering is eradicated, when true peace and justice prevail. But here's the thing, getting there, achieving that ultimate state of redemption, it's not going to be a walk in the park.
There are going to be bumps along the road.
For sure. Obstacles, setbacks, moments of doubt, and even to despair. Our sources are very clear about that. But even in the midst of all that, there's this unwavering faith in a brighter tomorrow, this conviction that we're moving towards something better. And that brings to mind one of my absolute favorite lines from the material you sent. Remember the one that says, "Then thou shalt see and be radiant, and thy heart shall fear and thrill."
Oh, wow, yes. It's like this perfect encapsulation of those mixed emotions, that exhilarating blend of hope and, well, I guess you could call it a healthy dose of apprehension for the unknown.
It really is. And I think it speaks to something universal, whether we're talking about this grand idea of global redemption or simply navigating the ups and downs of our own individual lives. We're all going to experience both triumphs and hardships. That's just part of the deal.
So true. But these high holidays and that time of deep introspection that they usher in, it's like they're offering us a framework for approaching those inevitable highs and lows with a sense of resilience, with hope.
Exactly. And if our listeners walk away with just one aha moment from this whole conversation, I hope it's this, that even in the face of uncertainty, even when those feelings of fear or doubt creep in, we have a choice. We can choose to approach life and even those challenging periods of reflection with a fundamental optimism, a belief that no matter what, goodness and growth are always possible.
That's a really powerful message. And you know what? It actually reminds me of something you mentioned earlier, that closing prayer of Yom Kippur, the one that expresses this hope for a year of blessings over curses.
Exactly. It doesn't shy away from acknowledging the existence of challenges, but it encourages us to face them head on with that unwavering belief that things can and will get better.
Wow, it's like we're coming full circle here. So it's not enough to just understand this paradox intellectually, right? It's about actually applying it to our own lives, choosing to move forward with that same sense of hope and resilience, even when we're afraid, even when we're unsure of what lies ahead.
You got it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most profound paradox of all that. By acknowledging our own vulnerability, that very human capacity for fear and doubt, we actually unlock an even greater capacity for hope, for resilience, and yes, even for joy.
Now that is something to reflect on. To our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of the high holidays. We hope this conversation has given you much to think about, perhaps even a new lens through which to view those inevitable ups and downs we all face in our own lives. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep exploring those uncharted territories within yourselves and the world around you, and as always, keep diving